Hello and welcome to part 2 in my series of restoring a encore guitar. In last video we fixed the body and we painted it. But there is a reason why I didn't show you how I painted the guitar body, and we'll get back to it in next video or the video after that. Anyway, I think it's a cool idea that I have, and so I'm going with it, and hopefully you guys are gonna think it's cool too. In this video we are gonna look at the neck and we're gonna do some work on it. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove the tuners, and then we're gonna start working on it. Let's see, the nut slot here has taken some damage and needs to be fixed. And the way I'm gonna fix it is to glue on a new piece of rosewood. This is from an old guitar. I at one point had to remove a fretboard from a guitar, and I kept the broken fretboard and cut it up into smaller pieces, because I know that sometimes there is damage to a fretboard and you can inlay a new piece of rosewood. So saving small pieces is something I really recommend you doing. For example, if I had damage on one of these lower frets here, this one could easily be fitted in here. And so that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to fit this in here. So without rambling on too much, because I know my videos are too long, but I'm working on it, we're just going to get started, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So by now you most likely know that to remove the tuners you need to unscrew the screws holding the tuners in place. And you don't really need to see me do, because you most likely know how to unscrew a screw. And so you have to do that to all of them. That's how easy they came out. Okay, so this is a nail punch. You usually use this when you have a nail you need to hit and you need it to go in, but you don't want the hammer to leave a mark on the wood surrounding the nail, because it has a very tiny little surface here that can fit on the nail. Hammer it in. And we're going to use it to remove these washers. They are not screwed in place, they are pressed in. And if I go on the inside here, which is going to be kind of hard for you to see, but on the inside there is a tiny little ring that is part of the front washer here. You lean it up against that and you just put some force and you push it in, and that way, hope you can see this, a little bit hard to show you, but I'm able to press it out. Now you can use a hammer and hit it to make them come out, but you should actually, with just the force in your hand, be able to press it out. And then you're all good. Coming out nice and neat. Okay, so now we are going to clean this up, and we're going to use a file, and make sure you have a file with one side that does not have teeth on, because that side we're going to lean up against the fretboard here, just like this. And so when we cut down, like so, we'll take off all these weird marks and gunk and all the crap that we need to get rid of, but we won't cut into the actual playing surface, because if this line gets moved closer to this fret, then the guitar is never going to be able to stay in tune, or rather it's never going to play in tune. And as you can see, fairly quickly I can actually get this all smoothed out. Now, as you probably can see, it's basically done, but the thing is, whoever did this has used some sort of epoxy and it's sunken really deep into the wood, and so I'm trying to see how far down I have to go and see if I can get to bare wood. And if I can't, we're going to have to use epoxy to glue the new piece on, because wood glue will not stick to epoxy. Okay, so I managed to get down past the epoxy, and I think I'd be able to get a nice bond here. So I'm going to take a knife and I'm just going to do some light scratches in the surface, like this, and the other way around too, just so the glue has something to bite to, basically. And I'll do the same to this piece of rosewood. And now I'll just put some wood glue, fair amount but not too much, on the piece of wood glue on, and I'll just put this in place, and I'll leave a tiny bit of gap between them, just because I don't need to glue them on to each other. And I'll put a piece of tape over and I'll press it down and into place, something like that. Now I'll just try to see how the gap looks, and I feel like this might be good enough. And I'll just leave this to dry now for about 20 minutes. That's what the glue says the package that I should do, so that's what I'm going to do. If you have a different kind of glue, you should read what it says on the packaging and go with that. Okay, so the glue is still drying a little bit, but it's been about 20 minutes, but we'll come back to it later. I sort of want to reshape the headstock a little bit. Now I could remove the lacquer and I could sand off the logo and I could redraw a completely new headstock and, you know, sort of really make something different. Maybe even copy something Fender Stratocaster with the shape. But I've done that before and it's not really a challenge and it's also not anything new for me, so you can watch other videos I've done about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to keep this logo on the headstock out, removing it and reshape it anyway. I'm just going to put some masking tape on. I'm going to try to see if I can work this out anyway. So first off, here we have the logo and we're going to keep most of it. Just going to basically like see how far in we can go. Something like that maybe. I'll put a ruler here and something like that. We have a pretty straight line we can keep, and then here we'll come in and make this round over a little bit more round and not so faded as right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why I sort of don't like this headstock so much, because it feels sort of like it is not really saying anything, which might be a weird way of putting it, but I can work on making it a little bit, want to define it a little bit more, I guess I'm trying to say. So I'm just gonna sit here and rework the headstock a little bit until I have something that is a little bit more classic, but maybe not too much of a copy of a Fender headstock. You know, something like that. I'll be back real soon when I've decided exactly what I want. Okay, so here I have my random orbital sander. I have this wooden base that I sometimes use when I have something with a lacquer that I don't want to touch the metal base because I'm afraid it will mar up the finish. And I've put down the masking tape on the neck and I've cut out the lines where it goes. So now I'm just going to sand this back to where the line I've drawn out meets the actual edge. Okay, so here we have the headstock now, and I'm just going to remove the tape and we'll see what I did. So the logo is still where it's supposed to be, and yeah, the rest is pretty good. It's more Fender inspired, I know, but I just feel like you can't really get away from that. If you do a headstock for something like a Strat or a Tele, the headstock needs to somewhat match the shape of the body, and it's just, you know, such a classic design that the headstock needs to also be somewhat classical. And if you want a more modern shape up here, go for it, but maybe think about what shape you have on the body so that they match. Okay, so now the glue has mostly dried and we can start working on cutting it down to size. And at first I'm just gonna try to remove the bulk of it because it is a little bit much up here, and that's because we have the entirety of the fretboard glued on here basically, but we only need half of it or something. So let's just quickly see how much we have to remove. Okay, so now I've basically cut this down to the same level as the fretboard, and it looks a little bit rough, it needs sanding. We're gonna take care of that real soon, but first, now we can come in here and we can start carving down this lip that hangs over, and we're just gonna start off by going at where the fretboard angle meets the new piece and go a little bit before and carve away the wood. And we'll do that on both sides. And it's just because if we go a little bit shallow, we can work our way in and slowly cut away the excess until we match the two pieces up. And so I'm just gonna cut like this and remove the excess until we have matched these two pieces up. And now we're gonna move on to the next part, which is we are gonna sand everything smooth. Okay, so here's the headstock right now, and as you can probably see, or maybe you can't because the camera won't pick it up, there are some imperfections left in the finish because I've been scraping away. And there also were a couple of imperfections left from other weird things, like super glue had run down, so I had to reshape that a little bit. I have here a can of lacquer, and I'm just going to take a brush and I'm just going to stroke it over all the areas. I'm not going to pay too much attention on making it perfect, but I'm going to make sure that I put on very thin amount so that it won't run everywhere. And then we'll be back and continue working on the neck once it has dried, and we can, do some sanding of the lacquer and touch up to make it perfect. But before then, I'm just going to lacquer it and leave it to dry, and so I'll see you in a bit. Okay, thanks. The lacquer's dried, but as you probably can see in the reflection, it looks a little bit uneven. So here I have 1000 grit wet and dry sandpaper with a little bit of water on it, and I'm just gonna start sanding to smooth everything out. And I'm gonna go over all of the areas, so the inner parts here where I sanded it and finished it and removed things yesterday, and just make everything super smooth. And the way you make sure that it's super smooth is you sand it and then you check for the dull areas and make sure that the entire place is dull. And I'll come back once I've sanded everything, because you don't need to see me sand more than what you're seeing in this little clip here of me sanding this place here. But just remember to sand it and then check and see what kind of reflections you get. And right here you can see that you can still see some marks. So we need to continue sanding here for a little bit. Okay, so the next thing I have to do is I have a weird mark here that is probably kind of hard to see. Maybe you can see that it looks a little bit weird and wonky in the reflection. I don't really know what's happened here, but I think some super glue has run down the neck and collected here in a pool. So I have a piece of wood here with some wet and dry sandpaper with some water on top of it. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to sand like this and flatten the surface, and I'll go like this for a bit, and then I'll dry it off and I'll look at it and try to see if all the highlights are gone, which they're not. There's a little bit more, and then I'll just continue like this. Okay, so now we're gonna buff this area right here because it become dull, and so we're just gonna smear a little bit of buffing compound onto this area here, like so. Just smear it around. And this is the kind of rubbing compound you buy to polish your car. So if you're looking for it and you don't know where to get it, go to your local automotive shop or something like that. And in my drill I have a foam sponge. And I know it looks terrible, but that's because I have been saying for a long time that I'm going to go and buy a new one, and I'm just not getting it done, which is super bad. When they get to this point, you really should switch them out. And I'm just being very lazy, which is something you shouldn't do. So don't do that, even though I'm doing it. And then I'm just going to move it around. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's pretty glossy now. It's not perfect, but it's okay, I think. And now I'm just going to go around and do it everywhere where I've sanded and put on new finish and try to get this to look neat. Okay, so here I have an old bone nut that I was going to use at some point on something, and it's been laying around. And I'm going to put it on this guitar for now, and we'll get something better later down the line when we go to upgrade things on this guitar. And I think it's gonna fit. It's a little bit on the small side. We should actually have another nut, but I think it's gonna work. But the slot here needs to be widened a little bit, and it's gonna need to be widened for whatever nut I put in, because I put it on the smaller side. And so I'm just gonna take a file and sand away the back. This part here is the back. Don't ever sand towards the fretboard. And that's why a tiny file like this works very good, because you can get in and you can sand away without worrying about moving up against the fretboard, because you can see where you put the file. And so I'm just going to go like this until the nut goes into the slot, which, as you can see, doesn't need to widen that much. Okay, so now I have sanded this out so that this will fit. And I also glue a piece of wood on the back of this because I felt like this was a little bit too short and this was a little bit too deep. And so we can put this in, and I'm trying to center it up so that we have, because it's a little bit too tiny, so that we have enough spacing on both sides. And it's just there for now. We'll switch it out. And if you make it fit so that you can just press it in, that's the best, honestly, because you don't necessarily need to glue a nut in. And if you need to, you should only have a little dab of glue. But this will work. I can feel that it's gonna stay in place. And yeah, it looks good. And we're gonna reshape this when we go to put strings on and make everything perfect. Okay, so that's the end of the video. We still have a little bit of work to do on the neck in form of setup and polishing the frets and things like that, but we'll take that when we actually put the guitar together, because there's no sense really in doing it now. I might change the back of the neck, I don't really know. I sort of like it, but I also sort of feel like I could make it a little bit thinner, faster, and things like that. But we'll look at that later, maybe when we actually come to putting the guitar together. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, and comment below your thoughts and feelings about the video, then I would appreciate that a lot. This is the way the neck looks right now, and I hope that you agree with me that it looks better. Until next time, stay awesome and cool, and go and, I don't know, reshape a headstock maybe? That could be a lot of fun.